Morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Alicia Sanchez. I'm the UNAIDS Youth Programs Coordinator based in Geneva. First, I would like to thank and express my gratitude to NoTimeToWait organizer for inviting me to participate in this conference. This is a really exciting a conference led by young people that is growing in outreach and creates a really valuable space for youth partners, but also other key stakeholders to interact and reflect on critical issues for the HIV response. So I'm really thrilled to be here with you. I prepared a few slides with some information and messages for you. So I hope this information is helpful for the work you do. Let's get started. So the importance of responding to the needs and demands of young people has been gaining unprecedented momentum in the HIV response in the past few years. It is now recognized that we won't be able to end AIDS if we don't address the particular needs of young people. And if we don't work with young people, not only as beneficiaries, but also as partners and leaders in the HIV response. So that's why it's so important to focus the HIV response on young people. But let's see some of the numbers. There are 3,300,000 young people living with HIV in the world. The HIV prevalence among young people is 0.3%, but if we zoom in, we will see some inequalities, and we will see that some populations are more affected than others. For example, the prevalence among young sex workers is around 4%. Among young gay men and other men who have sex with men is around 6%. Among young people who inject drugs is 5%, and among transgender people is 11%. Also among young prisoners is 1%. So we see that these key populations must be addressed, and the needs of these populations really need to be considered in the HIV response. So in terms of new infections, we know that around 400,000 young people acquire HIV every year, and that's around 27% of all new infections globally. So that's why it's so important to address the needs of young people in the HIV response, because they constitute an important percentage of new infections globally. In terms of AIDS-related death, we have 45,000 deaths per year. Next slide, please. We have seen in the past 10 years important, amazing progress in terms of reducing new infections. We have achieved 31% reduction in new infections among young people in the past 10 years. But unfortunately, this remains far from the targets we have set for 2025, especially if we look at the political declaration sets an important target, particularly for young women. And the aim is to reach less than 50,000 new infections among young women by 2025. It's important also to mention that 7,700 new infections occur every week among young people 15 to 25 years old. And almost 2/3 of these new infections happen among young women and girls. If we zoom in more into this data, we'll see that 83% of the new infections among young women 15 to 25 years old occur in sub-Saharan Africa. So this really gives us a clear idea on where to focus our efforts. So far, we have seen that key populations are more affected than by HIV, and also young women and girls in sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. The issues around knowledge of HIV prevention and modes of transmission is an important one, because globally only 1 in 3 young people demonstrate accurate knowledge of HIV prevention. And if we look at the data showed on the slide, we'll see that a reduced number of countries actually have education policies on life skills based HIV and sexuality education in place. Only 27.2% have such policies in place in primary school. And we also see that there is an important number that do not actually have data available. So we actually don't know what's happening in these countries. Same if we see as the data for secondary school and the policies in place for secondary school, we see that there is a 12.8% of countries that have such policies in place, and an important number that do not have any data or information. And if we go into the implementation level, we see that these numbers are even lower. Next slide, please. We are actually never going to achieve the targets if there are barriers for adolescents to access services. And we see that still on the slide, we'll see that age of consent laws are in place in many countries. And also it is important to notice that a substantial number of countries do not actually have data available on to really demonstrate if these policies are or not in place. So we don't know about the situation in these countries. So we see that, for example, countries that with laws requiring parental consent for adolescents to access contraceptives, including countries, is around 25.6%. And also it's important to mention here that there's a substantial number of countries that do not have data available on this indicator. We also see on the right side the countries that require parental consent for adolescents to access HIV testing. And we see that 23.6% require this, have policies in place that require consent for adolescents 18 years and below. So these barriers really constitute an important issue we need to address in the HIV response if we are going to end AIDS among young people. Next slide, please. Another important aspect is how young people actually have are participating in policy or strategy development at the country level. Decision making is critical. Is critical for young people to access these spaces, so they have a say and they have the right to actually influence these policies that are related to their health and well-being. We see that many countries, an important number of countries, say that young people actually participate in this strategy or policy guidelines development processes, but there are also like around 20% of countries that still do not have young people participating at these spaces. And we also have a substantial number of countries that do not actually have data available on this indicator. Next slide, please. So the Global AIDS strategy has been approved recently, and it was built upon a consultative process in which young people actually had the chance to also participate. The Global AIDS strategy sets really the key priority areas for the HIV response for the next 5 years, and also establishes the key priority actions that need to take place in order to achieve the targets set for 2025. Next slide, please. So what's new about this strategy? It was, as I mentioned, a participatory process in which young people had a really important role. Also, the strategy uses an inequality lens to close the gaps, preventing progress to end AIDS. So establish an inequality framework because it's really important to address really the structural factors that drive the HIV epidemic. And also, what's new about this strategy is that it has an unprecedented focus on HIV prevention, which is also new because previous strategies focus more on treatment, and this one really has an important focus on prevention. Next slide. So what's really exciting about this strategy is that communities are placed at the center of the strategy. Has been recognized that we won't be able to end the AIDS epidemic without partnering with communities, including, of course, young people. For the first time, I think a global AIDS strategy provides a clear programmatic guidance for youth programming, and this is something really exciting. In the strategy, you will see that there is a result area. There are 10 results areas, and one of them is dedicated to the HIV response for young people. Also, it's important to mention that the strategy and the political declaration establish new commitments to scale up the community-led service delivery, and they have set targets for so 30% of service delivery on areas related to treatment are delivered by communities. 80% of services related to HIV prevention must be delivered by young people by 2025, and 60% of the services related to addressing the structural factors and barriers to the HIV response must be delivered by communities by 2025. Next slide, please. So what to do about it is just, these goals get are and the strategy and the targets have been set to get every country and community on track to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030. Also marks the priorities for advocacy and accountability, and became an important input for the political declaration that was adopted this year as well. Next slide, please. So the 3 strategic priorities of the strategy, the first one is to maximize access to people-centered HIV services. The second one is around breaking down the structural barriers to achieve HIV outcomes. And the third one is about fully resourcing the HIV response and integrate systems and services to be able to meet the targets. Next slide, please. We have set just a quick overview of the targets that have been set. Before we had the 90-90-90 targets on testing and treatment, and now we have 95-95-95 targets for 2025. So that means that 95% of people living with HIV must know their status. 95% of the people that know their status must be on treatment, and 95% of people on treatment must be virally load suppressed. And then we have something that's new. We have the less than 10% targets, which try to address the societal legal barriers around the HIV response, and is particularly to address laws that criminalize young people or key population. It is also to address laws that are related to gender based inequalities and barriers, and also punitive laws. Next slide, please. So what is in a nutshell, the priority actions to achieve the result area focus on young people? We have the result area on young people has 6 different pillars. One of them is, and it is, there is a huge emphasis on investing in youth leadership and youth responses. Also, it's really important to foster strategic partnerships between young people and key stakeholders. Also, another pillar is to increase access to quality education, especially focusing on comprehensive sexuality education. The next one is about increasing access to integrated youth-friendly SRHR services, but going beyond that, also social protection services. The next pillar is about removing barriers to access services, including the parental consent laws that we mentioned before. And the last pillar is around strengthening data on young people. Next slide, please. So what are the key messages, the things that you must take away from this presentation? Despite the progress, we are far behind achieving the targets we have set. So we really need to accelerate progress. And how we do that? Scaling up the meaningful youth engagement of young people in decision-making spaces, and also accelerating action with and for young people in the next 5 years. That's a critical area. Also, additional efforts needs to be made to really address the structural factors that drive the HIV epidemic among young people, like inequalities, gender-based violence, poverty, criminal laws, and really not enabling environments, and so on. We must definitely remove all the barriers to access services, especially the age of consent laws. We also really need to focus efforts on increasing access and retention in school for young people, especially for young women and girls and key population. So they can also strengthen access to high quality gender transformative and age appropriate comprehensive sexuality education, which is fundamental. It's a fundamental right and also a must in the HIV response. And finally, strengthening the partnerships among young people. And finally, the last message, and the one I really want you to keep from this presentation, is that there is actually an unprecedented opportunity in the HIV response for young people right now. All the global frameworks have really stressed out the importance of addressing the needs of young people. So if we take the Global AIDS Strategy, the Political Declaration, and other frameworks like the Global Fund Framework and others, young people has really been placed high on in terms of the priorities of these strategies. So it's a really good opportunity for movement building, for increasing the capacity of young people, for working together and really expanding alliances with with key stakeholders. So I will stop. I will stop here because I think this is one thing that I would like to um, I would like you to reflect on and see how you can really take these messages into your programming, into the work you're doing. I hope this information was useful for you, and do not hesitate to reach out to me if you have any comments or questions. Thank you.